My name is Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasanain. I served the Indian Army for 40 years and ended up as the General Officer Commanding of the 15th Corps, also known as Chinar Corps, in Srinagar. I retired in the year 2013 and since then have been involved with a series of academic studies, strategic studies and analyses, and bringing knowledge about Jammu and Kashmir to the general public and to the academic world. What I'm going to be speaking about today is war, proxy war, and terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. Ideally, this subject actually in the year 2019, now as I'm speaking, is about 30 years old. It all goes back to 1989. But classically, to study this in a little more detail, you need to go back almost 70 years to 1947, from where it all really began. So during the course of this talk, I'm going to give you a backgrounder, starting from 1947, briefly till 1989. And then from 1989 in a little more detail, catering for various milestones which have taken place in the history of the Jammu and Kashmir conflict from 1989 till 2019, the effect that each of these milestones has had subsequently, and finally ending up in an analysis of what we need to do to actually counter the proxy war which we are facing in Jammu and Kashmir from Pakistan. So let me start from 1947. As you're aware, in 1947, the 15th of August, Independence Day, this partition of the subcontinent, India and Pakistan were created. From the Indian subcontinent, the former British Indian Empire. The British Indian Empire had given a choice to the over 550 principalities, royal principalities, of what dominion they would like to join, whether the Indian or the Pakistani. And there were a set of rules for that based upon geographic proximity, based upon population majority, etc. And based on this, the Radcliffe Line was created between India and Pakistan, which created the border. A problem arose about a couple of areas, principalities. Among them was Hyderabad, Junagadh, and Jammu and Kashmir. I will not refer so much to Junagadh and Hyderabad, and I shall focus on the state of Jammu and Kashmir, the principality of the kingdom of Jammu and Kashmir, which was under the rule of Maharaja Hari Singh at that time. This was a strange kingdom which really had a number of subdivisions. It had Gilgit-Baltistan in the north, it had Ladakh, it had Kashmir Valley, and it had the Jammu division. And there was different ethnic and religious composition in each of these areas. But by and large, the argument which Pakistan today always goes upon is that Jammu and Kashmir was Muslim majority. And therefore, as a part of the rules which were created for the partition of India, Jammu and Kashmir should have become a part of Pakistan. However, this was not to be at that time. The Maharaja was keen that Jammu and Kashmir should be a part of India. And in fact, he wished initially that Jammu and Kashmir should remain independent. But since there was no such choice, he was looking for a standstill agreement so that he can have more time to make up his mind in consultation with his advisors and the public of Jammu and Kashmir. That was not to be. As he was seeking a standstill agreement and did sign a standstill agreement and subsequently was seeking more time, Pakistan chose to change the situation on the ground by invading Jammu and Kashmir with what are called the Qabbalis or the tribals. What needs to be remembered is that since Pakistan did not have a regular standing army at this time, and the British Indian Army was under division, Pakistan Army was yet to be fully created. A few senior Pakistan Army officers took the services of the tribal fighters, the Qbalis, formed a couple of lashkars and invaded the state of Jammu and Kashmir, so that militarily they could change the situation on the ground, capture Jammu and Kashmir and merge it with the state of Pakistan. This all started on 22nd of October when the first Lashkar entered from Muzaffarabad through Uri and into the Kashmir Valley. Simultaneously, as other Lashkars were also launched. The intention here was to get earliest to the Srinagar airstrip, which was not an airfield at that time, to the Srinagar airstrip by capturing Uri, Baramulla, and going beyond Patan and on to Badgam and the Srinagar airstrip. However, the Qbalis got involved with the looting, pillaging in Uri, in Baramulla. They were involved with the rape of many women, Kashmiri women. And as a result of this, while the Jammu and Kashmir state forces under the very brave Commander Brigadier Rajinder Singh, Mahavir Chakra, posthumous, fought it out against the Qbalis did manage to reach Baramulla, and that is when they carried out the pillage and destruction of Baramulla. And because of this, a little time was gained. The Maharaja then took a decision in discussion with the Government of India that he would finally accede to the Indian state. 26th of October, a very historic date, 26th of October 1947 is the date, when he signed the Instrument of Accession, which is the formal document by which Jammu and Kashmir is supposed to have ceded to India. And this is what India recognizes. This is what it has projected to the world and to the United Nations. And this is what the United Nations has accepted. As soon as the Instrument of Accession was signed, India was invited by the Maharaja automatically to send his forces, the Indian Army, to fight against the Qbalis and take over the state of Jammu and Kashmir. On 27th of October, in a lightning operation, 1st Battalion of the Sikh Regiment, in a couple of Dakota aircraft, landed at the Srinagar airstrip. And from there started the complete campaign for pushing back the Qbalis, all the elements of the Pakistan army on the Qbalis, and recapturing all the areas. The war of 1947 stretched into 1948 for the better part of 1 year and about 4 months, 16 months this war carried on. Fought in Ladakh, in Gilgit-Baltistan, in the areas of Kashmir Valley, and in the Jammu division. Unfortunately, despite 16 months, the Indian army, which had been dismembered to a very great extent through the demobilization process after 1945, had to strive to get back Jammu and Kashmir, but could not capture the entire territory. By that time, India decided politically to go to the United Nations. The United Nations had just been formed in 1945-46, and this was one of the first major cases which came before the United Nations. And the United Nations finally, through various parleys with Pakistan and India, decided finally to bring about a ceasefire on the 1st of January 1949. And this brought about a standstill to the military activities in Jammu and Kashmir, because of which both the armies, the Pakistan army, now by that time a little more organized, and the Indian army, much more organized on its side, now faced each other eyeball, along a line which was to be created subsequently called the ceasefire line. This line, today known as the line of control, in 1949 came to be known as the ceasefire line and continued to be called by that name till 1972 after the Shimla Agreement. The UN agreement primarily stated, or the UN resolution primarily stated, that a plebiscite will be conducted in the state of Jammu and Kashmir to allow the people to exercise their choice option for joining either India or Pakistan. There was no third option of freedom or azadi as it's known. But there were certain conditions laid down for that. And the conditions for conducting of the plebiscite were very clear. It said that all those forces which have committed aggression on the state of Jammu and Kashmir shall vacate the territory. India shall retain a minimal force to organize and conduct such a democratic process, and then finally the decision will be made. But what we have to remember is that from 1949 till today, Pakistan has refused to vacate the territories of Jammu and Kashmir under its control in the areas called Pakistan occupied Kashmir, or the northern areas now known as Gilgit-Baltistan, continues to hold those areas, continues to man the line of control, and accuses India of not honoring the UN ceasefire agreement, the UN resolution of 1st January 1949, and therefore the whole status of Jammu and Kashmir remains as it is. Pakistan has thereafter used force to try and change the status quo a couple of times. It tried it in 1965 through an operation it called Operation Gibraltar, in which it hoped that by inducting a couple of Razakars, they would be able to instigate the public of Jammu and Kashmir to rise against India and fight on their behalf and force the merger of Jammu and Kashmir with Pakistan. That was not to be, because in 1965, finally, based upon this trigger, a war was fought between India and Pakistan, which finally came to an end after 22 days in September. And the war expanded into other areas, into Punjab and into Rajasthan and Gujarat. And finally, after a ceasefire, it was agreed that there would be a return of territories. And that is what happened, leading to a status quo. But in 1971, a situation again arose where the trigger of East Pakistan, where Pakistan had decided to coerce its own population, that trigger led to a larger war, the 71 India-Pakistan War, by which the state of Bangladesh was created. And Pakistan had to lose half its territory. Pakistan did use this trigger at that time in 1971 to try and regain certain territories in Jammu and Kashmir, but the Indian army did not allow that. And so after 1971, once again, the 16th of December, on Vijay Diwas, the victory day for India, a ceasefire was brought about. It took the better part of almost 8 months after that to come to the negotiating table at Shimla, where Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the then Prime Minister of Pakistan, met Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. The two delegations met at Shimla. And after a very detailed discussion, a number of parleys, the Shimla Agreement was signed. By the Shimla Agreement, the major ingredients of the Shimla Agreement, it was clarified that the issue of, or all issues between Pakistan and India would be resolved bilaterally. And there would be no scope for any third-party intervention. This classically defined that the United Nations role, despite the UN resolution of 1st January 1949, despite this resolution, the United Nations would not have anything further to do with this conflict. There was a United Nations military observer group for India and Pakistan, often called UNMOGIP, which had been placed in 1949-50 in the state of Jammu and Kashmir on both sides of the ceasefire line. That group, under the Shimla Agreement, ceased to be recognized. However, its presence was accepted by India, continues to remain to the day, and more about that should be spoken subsequently. The other aspect of the Shimla Agreement was very clear, that there would be a pullback to the various status positions as of the 3rd of December 1971, and that the ceasefire line would be further demarcated. A line of its terminology was changed to the line of control, and that no side would by force try and change the status of the line of control. So as far as India was concerned, 1972, the signing of the Shimla Agreement ensured the return of 93,000 prisoners of war back to Pakistan. The return of territories to Pakistan on the Western Front, the creation of the line of control, the erstwhile ceasefire line, and the most important thing, that all issues of the future between India and Pakistan would be resolved bilaterally and not through any third-party intervention. This aspect needs to be kept in mind. The period 1972 to 1977 is very important in the sense, in these 5 years, Pakistan had a civilian government, the military having been removed from power after the loss of the war in 1971, the loss of Bangladesh, the loss of East Pakistan, and almost halving of the territory of Pakistan. In this period, 2-3 things are of importance. 1974, India tested its nuclear device at Pokhran. This test was primarily as a technology demonstrator, and it was in response to the progressive nuclearization, weaponization, which was taking place in China. It was never aimed at Pakistan. However, Pakistan perceived that the growing power of India with nuclearization would create such a situation where militarily, once again, India could change the status quo, and therefore Pakistan decided to also go nuclear. And this was the statement at that time by Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the famous statement which was made, that Pakistan would eat leaves and would eat grass, but would have the bomb. And that is where the pursuit of the bomb started. By 1977, Pakistan had gone through 5 years of civilian rule without being under the military rule, one of the rare periods in its history. And in 1977, finally, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was overthrown in a coup d'etat by General Zia-ul Haq, and certain charges were brought against Prime Minister Bhutto, based upon which a trial was carried out, and finally Prime Minister Bhutto was hung to death in 1979. The more important thing here is 1977, the return of the military under the leadership of General Zia-ul Haq, who became initially the Chief Martial Law Administrator, of course, that he was, and also the President of Pakistan. As soon as General Zia-ul Haq came to power, the Pakistan Army took it upon itself to initiate its strategy for the retribution of the loss of East Pakistan in 1971. What must be remembered is that the loss of East Pakistan and the creation of Bangladesh led to a major psychological effect on the people of Pakistan, on the leadership of Pakistan and in particular on the Pakistan Army. The Pakistan Army swore that it would carry out retribution at any cost. However, pragmatism, by the angle of pragmatism, General Ziaul Haq looked upon his strategy from this particular angle, that fighting India in a conventional war and defeating it was not possible. That competing with India economically and gaining an upper hand may not be possible. What was possible was to offset the asymmetry between the conventional capability of India and Pakistan by Pakistan also going nuclear. This was the first assumption on the strategy, that Pakistan going nuclear would ensure that the asymmetry between India and Pakistan on the conventional battlefield would now be changed and both sides would almost come to the same level. The second part was that Pakistan would seek to exploit the various fault lines in India. And India's fault lines identified then were linguistic, ethnic, caste-based, regional, and the most important, religious. It felt that India's process of integration as a nation with a huge amount of diversity could be impeded by exploiting these various fault lines from time to time. For that, Pakistan needed to play the Islamic card. It needed support from the Islamic world, and it would demonstrate its capability of being the flag bearer of the Islamic world by being a strong military power and thereby seek more financial support from some Islamic countries. This strategy started playing out in the early 80s. In the early 80s, the first thing which happened was the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union. In fact, it happened at the end of 1979. In 1980, Pakistan became the frontline state for the United States to push back the Soviet Union from its invasion of Afghanistan. It also took the support of Saudi Arabia to finance this entire battle against the Soviet Union. Primarily, this was a triangular equation between the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, with Pakistan playing the frontline status. Its intelligence agency, the ISI, became the foremost intelligence agency in Afghanistan. To fight this war, the United States and Saudi Arabia put together a couple of thousand mercenaries from different Islamic countries who became the initial so-called jihadis to come, they're the transnational jihadis, to come to Afghanistan and fight this war for the next almost 10 years. Pakistan led this entire war with its elements of its armed forces, of its army, and succeeded by 1989 in supporting this in war, supporting Pakistan, supporting Saudi Arabia, and supporting the United States in expelling the Soviet Union from here, from Afghanistan. At the same time, Pakistan also tried to trigger greater turbulence inside Punjab, India's Punjab, where a fledgling movement was already taking place. A separatist movement had started some years ago. It supported it, financed it, gave it material assistance, and gained the initial experience of how to exploit India's fault lines. This brings us to the situation around about 1989, when a lot was happening in the world. This is the time when General Zia, through the 9 to 10 years that he fought the Soviet Union and Afghanistan, General Zia-ul-Haq had the opportunity and time to promote the Islamic identity of Pakistan and nurture his strategy, which would ultimately be played out against India. It needed a greater Islamic identity with people in India who would be the proxies to fight the war on behalf of Pakistan. A little more on this later, but this brings us to 1989, and it needs to be understood as to why the situation in 1989 was tailor-made for Pakistan to exploit. What we need to recognize is that given the international security environment and the situation in India at that time, it was a situation virtually tailor-made for Pakistan to intervene and actually execute, or at least initiate the execution of a strategy, the strategy for proxy war in India. Let us take a very brief look as to why this status or this situation had come about. When we normally look at various strategic situations, we usually like to examine them from different angles. Most strategic situations are normally examined first from a military angle, a diplomatic angle, political, social, and economic. When you examine the situation from all these angles, you get a larger comprehensive picture of the strategic status at a particular time in history. 1989 is a very crucial time, and we should just see what was happening internationally. Internationally, the Cold War had come to an end. The Soviet Union had been defeated in Afghanistan, been expelled or had withdrawn, and the Soviet Union was actually on the path to self-destruction, implosion, which happened actually in 1991 when it finally broke up into 15 different republics. At the same time, the Berlin Wall had fallen, and there was a clamor for the reunification of Germany, and the threats of the Soviet Union in Europe appeared to be receding. It was a time for what was called the creation of a new world order, which has not been created till today. But since the world was in a flux and the world was in a confusion, events taking place in different parts of the world were not in the focus of those who managed the world. In other words, the bipolar world was breaking up and becoming a unipolar world once again. On the political side, internally in India, the government, a very, very stable government formed in 1984, end of 84, had fallen out of favor. A 440-seat majority in the lower house and Lok Sabha had come to an end. We had political instability at the center, where we had governments changing from time to time. When political instability comes about at the center, the management of internal security, management of the borders itself always becomes a major challenge. The focus goes away, and the focus is more on internal issues, the focus is more on politics, the formation of governments, and so like. At this stage, I think it's appropriate that we take a break, sit back, and understand what has been spoken, discuss it out, so that subsequently we can have a second part of the understanding of the proxy conflict in Kashmir, which will be given out by me subsequently. Thank you.